The ATV's engine ripped through the serene morning quiet like a chainsaw, charging down the gravel road, hurling rocks at my truck and forcing one of my sanctuary volunteers to dive into the bushes for cover. I bolted outside, coffee sloshing over my boots, just in time to catch sight of Karen, yes, that Karen from the HOA, blazing down my private road like she was starring in her own Mad Max sequel. And she wasn't alone this time. 3 more ATVs trailed her, their riders whooping and hollering as they left a wake of dust, chaos, and pure entitlement. My gate hung wide open, its locks shattered, chains dangling like a lifeless snake. That's when it hit me. My peaceful wildlife sanctuary wasn't under attack by poachers or wild beasts, but by something far worse. A suburban tyrant wielding an HOA badge and a god complex. I glanced at the broken gate, then at the muddy path where I'd just relocated an injured croc, my jaw clenching tight. Karen had no clue what boundary she'd just crossed, but she was about to discover what lurks on the other side. I'm Riley, and after a decade of juggling military logistics and wildlife conservation overseas, I bought this slice of land just outside a gated HOA community, dreaming of a quiet spot for crocodile research and the occasional barbecue. The HOA had its own drama bubble and I had my own road, a gravel path snaking through the backwoods to my property, a legally deeded private access I maintained myself. No one used it. No one cared, that is, until Karen rolled into town, which city of the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you have any confrontation with the HOA. We'll narrate your story on our channel. Karen wasn't her real name, of course, but it fit her better than her designer sunglasses did. She was the new president of the HOA and treated the title like she'd just been crowned queen of a medieval kingdom. Day 1, she knocked on my gate, not the front, mind you, but the back one, and introduced herself by demanding a key so authorized personnel could monitor communal boundaries. I politely said no and handed her a copy of the deed. She blinked at it like I just handed her a napkin with scribbles, then promised to have legal review look it over. That was the beginning. At first, it was just snide comments. She'd walk her dog along the HOA fence and yell, "Still hoarding crocodiles, are we?" Then came the fake citations taped to my mailbox, noise violations for frog sounds, illegal foliage growth, unauthorized night activity. When I called the county about them, they laughed and told me nothing she sent had any legal bearing. I figured it would blow over. It didn't. 1 week later, her ATV appeared. Loud, orange, ridiculous. She rode it like she was training for an off-road championship, and she decided my private road was the perfect shortcut to the hiking trails behind my land. The first time, I caught her halfway down the path and waved her down. She stopped, helmet tucked under her arm, sunglasses perched on her head like she was about to sell me an overpriced timeshare. I explained again that the road was private. She smirked, revved the engine, and said, "Well, it looks public to me. You should put up more signs." So I did. I put up signs, 2 locks, and even built a small motion-activated gate arm. And for about 3 days, peace returned until I woke up one morning to find the gate arm ripped from its post and tire tracks running deep into the soil. My sanctuary manager, Nina, stood beside me, shaking her head. She's treating this place like her personal dirt park. The final straw came when I found a young crocodile, an injured one we just rescued, shivering in a torn section of fencing near the road. It had clearly been spooked. Karen's Joyride had sent vibrations through the ground and scared the poor thing into trying to escape. That animal had been through enough. I called her that night, calm but firm, told her I'd be pursuing legal recourse. She laughed into the phone and said, "It's just a road, Riley. You're being dramatic." 2 days later, an official letter from the HOA showed up, claiming the road was a shared easement and therefore subject to community access. It was written like legal mumbo-jumbo, but it had zero actual authority. Still, it was clear she wasn't backing down. That's when I knew I had to do something more strategic. I went back to my old skill set in another life. I had engineered tactical zones and containment areas in dense jungles. I knew how to design barriers that didn't look like barriers, and I had the permits to build what I needed: a wildlife water retention trench, a legal, ecologically beneficial project meant to support natural habitat. What Karen didn't know was that this trench would run directly across my road and just deep enough to discourage any unauthorized wheels. While I worked on the design, I also checked local wildlife relocation options. A nearby conservation site had too many adult crocs and was looking to rehome a few. The stars aligned. I arranged for 2 of the Cal St healthiest crocs to join the sanctuary once the trench was complete. A monitored, protected space with fresh water, shade, and basking areas on my land, under my jurisdiction, and right in Karen's path. Of course, it had to look legit. I filed environmental assessments, made sure the crocs would have adequate fencing, and installed low-voltage perimeter markers camouflaged as artistic landscaping. To the untrained eye, it would look like a glorified koi pond, but with teeth. All the while, Karen kept testing boundaries. I caught her ATV tires inches from my trench stakes, despite the new signage. I even overheard her bragging to her guests that she was taming the wild man next door. I smiled because soon she'd meet the wild ones. Then came the morning of the final trespass. The sun hadn't even broken fully over the trees when the engines came again. Karen and her entourage, 3 ATVs this time, ripped through the gate I'd reinforced the day before. The chain was cleanly cut. She didn't care anymore. The sound shook the birds from the trees. I ran outside, barely pulling on my boot. The sanctuary staff were already scrambling, trying to calm the animals. She didn't even stop, just drove through with her mirrored glasses and a smug grin, dragging a folding chair behind her ATV like a trophy. And then, just as quickly as she'd arrived, she was gone, kicking up dirt and laughter as she disappeared into the woods. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the trench was finished. And in 72 hours, it wouldn't just be a trench. It would be a crocodile habitat, monitored, legal, and most importantly, unavoidable. She had violated boundaries, endangered animals, and laughed at every attempt to stop her. But now the terrain itself would be my defense. And she was going to learn a very sharp, very scaly lesson in respect. The next time she tried to claim that road, she wouldn't find gravel, she'd find teeth. 3 days after Karen's joyride ripped through the heart of my sanctuary, I stood at the edge of the road with a worn-out measuring tape, 2 flags in the dirt, and a blueprint rolled under my arm. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about preservation, control, and making sure that the sanctuary, my life's work, didn't turn into a playground for power-hungry HOA tyrants. The gravel road, now scarred with ATV tire grooves, would no longer be a shortcut. It was about to become a line no one would dare to cross. The trench had to be precise, too shallow, and it wouldn't deter anything. Too wide, and it might raise suspicions. I marked off 25 FT across the road's narrowest choke point. That would give me enough room to construct what I was calling for now, a water retention habitat. It sounded bureaucratic enough to avoid nosy questions, but gave me the room to install what I really needed, a crocodile barrier that looked like nature, but functioned like a moat. I called up my old military buddy Cam, now working in environmental engineering, and asked if he had a few days to spare. When I explained what I was planning, he didn't even ask questions. He just laughed and said, On my way. Bring boots and duct tape. While I waited for Cam, I filed all the necessary paperwork. The county had a backlog of requests, but thankfully, I already had a standing license for wildlife activity. My documents framed the project as a habitat expansion, citing the benefits of water retention, erosion control, and native species support. I attached photos of existing fencing, security features, and sanctuary structures to reassure them. What I didn't attach was the full plan, a hidden drop-in for relocated crocs, and a system of motion-triggered lights and remote camera coverage. I didn't need to. As long as I met safety standards, the space was mine to use how I saw fit. Cam arrived 2 days later in a battered Jeep with a cooler of beer and a drone. He stepped out, gave me a one-armed hug, and whistled low at the path. So, this is Karen's conquest zone, huh? Looks like someone needs to learn the definition of trespassing. We got to work immediately. The first phase involved digging the trench. We brought in a mini excavator under the guise of landscaping and used it to carve out a 10T wide 6T deep basin to the HOA, watching from the fence line with binoculars. It probably looked like a drainage ditch, which was perfect. Next, we lined the bottom with a natural filtration system using crushed rock and biodegradable mesh, then layered in pond soil. Cam launched the drone once a day to survey progress and keep a visual record. At night, we reviewed the footage, not just of our project, but of Karen. She made daily patrols now, circling in her ATV with the smugness of a sheriff in an old western. The road was still open, but it wouldn't be for long. I could see her getting bolder. One evening, she even shouted across the fence, "I hope you're building a bridge. My ATV hates potholes." I smiled and waved back. "You're going to love what's coming." While construction continued, I contacted the wildlife transfer program I'd worked with before. They had 2 crocs, a healthy male and a slightly younger female, ready to be relocated due to overcrowding at their current site. They were calm around people, but still wild, and they do perfectly, in a controlled sanctuary with deeper water and warm basking areas. The paperwork was already in progress. I just needed the final inspection done before delivery. Once I had the crocs, the last piece would fall into place. On the 3rd night of digging, Cam and I sat around the fire pit, boots off and beers in hand, watching the sensor lights blink along the property line. "You sure this is going to work?" he asked. I nodded slowly. Karen isn't scared of fences or paperwork, but she'll think twice when the land itself pushes back. She wants to play queen of the neighborhood. Let's give her a kingdom she can't rule. Cam raised his bottle to swamp justice. The next morning, I noticed new tire tracks, not the usual ATV lines, but what looked like golf cart wheels. I followed them cautiously and found a plastic HOA sign staked into the ground right at the entrance to my private road. It read, "Temporary Community Trail Extension. HOA not liable for injuries." My blood pressure spiked. It wasn't just trespassing now, it was a coordinated effort to claim my land under fake community rules. I took a photo, yanked the sign out, and threw it in my burn pile. Then I called my lawyer. Thankfully, my property rights were airtight. The deed was crystal clear. But that didn't stop the HOA from trying to build a narrative. Karen was already spreading word that I was a recluse, hoarding dangerous animals and denying access to shared nature paths. One resident even messaged me on Facebook asking if I was arming crocodiles for home defense. I ignored it. Let them talk, because once the trench was finished and the crocs were settled, there wouldn't be any more questions, just choices. Stay off the road or end up face to face with nature's original boundary enforcement. By the end of the week, we had installed the final components: a low-voltage deterrent fence disguised as garden lighting, motion-activated sprinkler heads near the edges, and a camera system worked to my phone. The trench filled naturally with filtered water after a brief rainfall, giving it a deceptively serene look. Cam even added a few water plants and floating logs to sell the illusion. But beneath the calm surface, the sanctuary was fully operational, a perfect mix of beauty and warning. The last step was timing the arrival. I coordinated with the relocation team to bring the crocodiles just before dawn when traffic was low and the HOA's eyes were still groggy from sleep. They arrived in a reinforced truck, their crates marked and sealed with tags. We unloaded them, carefully using long poles and guided channels. The animals slid into the water with barely a ripple, circling once before settling near the edge to sunbathe. It was perfect and legal and completely out of Karen's control. By noon, everything was in place. The sensors were live, the warning signs were up. The trench looked like a pond, the crocs looked like statues, and the road looked like peace until the next intrusion. I knew it was coming. She couldn't help herself. She had declared this land her playground. Now she'd have to answer to its true residents. And sure enough, not 24 hours later, I heard it. The familiar snarl of Karen's ATV breaking the morning quiet. My camera app buzzed to life. Motion detected, road camera 1. The image loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, until there she was, full throttle, sunglasses on, hair whipping in the wind, heading straight toward the trench without a clue in the world. I stood on my porch, arms folded, waiting, because this time I didn't need to chase her. I didn't need to argue, I just needed to watch. She was about to learn something no HOA manual could prepare her for. You can bully people, you can lie on paper, but you can't argue with a crocodile. The sound of Karen's ATV came tearing down. The gravel again, louder than ever, echoing off the trees like some absurd war cry. I stood perfectly still on the porch with my phone in hand, live feed running. I didn't need to step off the deck this time. I had placed the motion sensors at the perfect height and angles, feeding a 360-degree view of the trench zone directly into my phone. There she was, revving and bouncing over the gravel like she was conquering the frontier. But this wasn't a frontier anymore. This was home turf. Mine and the crocodiles. Karen wasn't alone. Riding behind her were two more HOA members I vaguely recognized. Bill, the one who constantly complained about tree shade, and Brenda, who once asked me why my sanctuary didn't have cute animals like rabbits instead of those ugly lizard things. All three of them were grinning, laughing, clearly there for what they thought would be another unauthorized safari through my property. But this ride would not end the way they expected. Karen, of course, was leading the pack. She leaned forward, determined and confident, completely oblivious to the new addition to her stolen trail. I watched her approach the trench, which from a distance looked calm and deceptively shallow. The crocs had been sunbathing near the middle, half submerged, perfectly still. The trench water reflected the sky like a mirror, adding to the illusion of peacefulness. But I knew the moment those ATVs crossed the edge, everything would change. Karen didn't slow down, not even when she passed 3 newly posted signs that read, "Active Wildlife Area and no unauthorized access, dangerous animals present." In fact, she sped up. That ATV of hers bounced once on the gravel, kicked up a cloud of dust, and launched straight toward the edge of the pit. She hit the brakes too late. Her front wheels touched the muddy slope of the trench, skidded hard, and sent the ATV sliding sideways. Karen screamed, her voice echoing as the vehicle tilted, spun, and planted itself sideways, just feet from the water. Bill and Brenda stopped in time, both of them yanking their handlebars to avoid following her in. Karen stumbled off the ATV, one boot landing in the mud, the other stuck in the seat. She fell back with a loud grunt, arms flailing, her sunglasses flying off into the water. The crocs move. I had timed their feeding and activity windows perfectly to avoid aggression, but crocodiles are naturally territorial. One of them slowly shifted, gliding across the water with a smooth, deliberate grace. Karen was too stunned to notice at first. She just scrambled to her feet, covered in dirt, and trying to yank her boot free from the vehicle. It wasn't until she heard the soft splash and the slow churn of water that she looked up and saw the reptilian eyes watching her from just 10 feet away. She froze, absolutely froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. And then the second crocodile surfaced. Closer this time, jaws closed, just drifting. Watching from the safety of the far bank, Bill shouted something like, "Karen, don't move!" But his voice cracked in panic. Brenda was already backing her ATV away, wide-eyed and visibly shaking. Karen somehow finally regained her senses and backed away slowly from the water, her body shaking and one hand still clutching her now muddy phone. That was the precise moment the motion-triggered sprinklers activated. They were set low just at the trench's edge, meant to startle but not soak, and they did exactly what I hoped they would. A sudden spray erupted, arcing over Karen and dousing the ATV. The crocs didn't react, but Karen did. She screamed again, bolted up the slope, slipped, fell forward, and clawed her way up like a contestant in some chaotic obstacle course. When she finally made it to level ground, she looked like a swamp creature herself. Mud, panic, and humiliation, all wrapped in designer clothes and HOA audacity. I couldn't help myself. I stepped off the porch and slowly walked down the path, boots crunching softly over gravel. When I came into view, Karen was already on her feet, trying to regain whatever dignity she had left. "What the hell is this?" she yelled, voice breaking. "You could have killed me." I stopped about 10 feet away and folded my arms. "It's a legally permitted conservation trench with protected species," I said. "The signs were posted. The road is private. You trespass. This is outrageous." "There are crocodiles in a road," she sputtered. "It's not a road," I said, nodding at the posted deed marker. "It's a wildlife sanctuary extension on private land, which you and your ATV are currently violating." Bill and Brenda stayed quiet, both of them too pale to offer backup. Karen looked around as if searching for support, but none came. She looked back at the trench, now calm again, with the crocs retreating to the deeper water. "I'm going to the police," she said finally, voice trembling more from embarrassment than fear. "This is animal warfare." "Great," I replied. "Make sure to bring this footage too." I held up my phone and played a brief clip of her ATV ramming through the gate, tearing down the path and crashing. Near the trench, her eyes widened as the footage played. That's illegal surveillance." "It's security," I said. "And it's shared with the Wildlife Division as per my license. Everything you've done is on record, and so is the habitat." Karen's face was beet red. Her hair clung to her forehead. She stormed back to her ATV, which now refused to start. The thing let out a coughing noise and died. Brenda reluctantly helped her climb onto the back of her cart, while Bill pushed the dead ATV aside. They rode off in silence, covered in mud and shame. That night, I uploaded the footage to the private conservation Facebook group I co-managed, thinking it would get a few laughs. Instead, it exploded. The next morning, the clip had gone viral. Millions of views, comments pouring in from all over the country. News outlets started calling. One headline read, "Ho Queen meets her match in nature's real landlords." Another said, "Woman tries to steal road, gets humbled by reptiles." I never even submitted it to Reddit. Someone else did. The post shot up to the top of our entitled people with captions like, "Karen forgot Crocs are hoax exempt." The flood of attention brought more than just laugh. A local wildlife official publicly praised the sanctuary project, calling it a model for passive ecological protection, and noted the clear signage and preventive measures I'd taken. The HOA tried to respond with a formal complaint, but the county shut it down fast. In fact, they launched an inquiry into HOA leadership and their history of overreach. Karen's position was suspended pending review. Neighbors who once kept quiet now spoke up. One sent me a message that simply read, "About time someone put her in her place." Another offered to help plant trees along the trench. Even kids from the neighborhood came with their parents to learn about the crocodiles. This time, safely behind the observation fence, the road was no longer a battleground. It had become something more powerful, a reminder that not everything in life could be bulldozed by arrogance and a loud engine. Karen, meanwhile, kept a low profile. For the first time since she'd arrived, her ATV sat untouched in her driveway, and when she walked past my property now, she kept her head down and her steps quick. As for me, I returned to my work, the Crocs thriving, the sanctuary peaceful once again. The trench had done its job. No arguments, no more hoe nonsense. Just calm water, sharp teeth, and a lesson no one in the neighborhood would forget. The calm didn't last long. For a brief, beautiful week, Karen vanished from my daily routine. No more roaring engines, no hoe letters, no midnight gate rattling. Even the Crocs seemed more relaxed, drifting lazily in the sun and taking to their new trench like they'd been there forever. I thought maybe, just maybe, the message had finally sunk in. But that's not how people like Karen operate. She didn't disappear because she'd accepted reality. She was regrouping, and I didn't know it yet, but she was about to try something even more reckless. Something that would escalate everything to a level I wasn't even sure I was prepared for. It started with a rumor. Naina, my sanctuary manager, came into the office with an odd look on her face. She said a friend from the HOA gardening committee had mentioned that Karen was hosting a private meeting at her house. The topic: strategies for reclaiming community easements. That alone didn't bother me too much. Karen liked her fantasy legal battles, and I'd already proven ownership more times than I could count. But then Naina added that Karen had recently been seen walking the property line at night, clipboard in hand, measuring something with a flashlight and muttering about circumventing the trench. That same night, the sensors on the western fence went off at 2:38 a.m. I checked the camera and saw someone with a hood moving along the fence, ducking and fiddling with the post. I couldn't see the face clearly, but I didn't need to. The stance, the build, the way she moved like she owned every inch. There was no doubt in my mind. Karen wasn't giving up. She was planning something, and whatever it wasn't going to be legal or smart. I reinforced the sensors, added 2 more solar-powered lights, and even rigged up a secondary motion-triggered camera angled low to catch any foot traffic, but I wasn't ready for what came next. 2 nights later, just after midnight, the alarm blared louder than usual. I pulled up the feed and blinked in disbelief. Karen wasn't just snooping around this time. She was inside the fence. She cut the zip ties off one of the side gates, probably thinking it was some hidden entrance. She wasn't alone either. 2 men, one in a baseball cap, the other dragging what looked like bolt cutters, were helping her move something. A ladder, a roll of plastic sheeting. It took me a few seconds to realize they were trying to build a temporary bridge across the trench. She had come back with a plan to bypass the crocodile moat, and she'd brought backup. I grabbed my phone and hit the emergency call for the county sheriff. While I waited for the response, I flipped through the camera feed. Karen and her 2 minions were halfway done, setting up what looked like plywood boards with ropes tied on either side, as if they planned to pull it across like some kind of swing bridge. It would have been comical if it weren't happening in real time on my protected land. Then one of the crocs surfaced. The bigger male eased out of the water like a ghost, silent and steady. He hovered right under the shadow of the half-built bridge, just watching. Karen didn't notice. She was too busy yelling at one of the men for dropping a plank. The whole scene looked like a high school theater production of an escape mission gone wrong. Before I could decide whether to go down there or just wait for the deputies, the sensor lights popped on. Bright, blinding LED beams lit up the entire trench zone like a stadium. The croc didn't flinch. Karen did. She gasped and shielded her face, then looked down and finally saw the eyes staring back at her just feet away. One of the men froze and the other took off running toward the gate. Karen screamed at him, "Get back here! It's just a lizard!" The second man didn't stop. He disappeared into the trees, crashing through undergrowth like a deer on fire. The one, still beside her, slowly backed away, hands raised, breathing fast. "Karen," he said, "we need to leave right now." Karen stood her ground, clutching a piece of plywood like it was a shield. "He can't do this," she snapped. "He can't put crocodiles in a road. I'll sue him into next week." Just then, the first red and blue flash lit up the trees. The deputies had arrived. Their truck pulled up just behind the sanctuary entrance, and within minutes 3 officers came jogging down the path, flashlights raised, guns holstered, but clearly ready. One of them called out, "Hands where we can see them!" Karen dropped the plywood like it was on fire and raised her hand. The man beside her did the same, though his legs looked ready to give out. The croc stayed where it was, unbothered, like a king watching fools stumble in his court. The officers separated them, took statements, and asked me to walk them through. The camera footage I did gladly. Every minute of the trespass was recorded in crystal clarity. From the gate cutting to the trench crossing attempt to the moment she laid eyes on the crocodile, it was all there. One officer turned to me and said, "This isn't just trespassing. She tampered with your conservation site. That's a big deal." Karen, hearing this, exploded. "It's not a conservation site, it's a crocodile trap. He's weaponizing animals." The deputy raised a brow. "You walked onto his land at night with tools to build a bridge over a clearly posted protected habitat. That's not a good look." Karen was arrested on the spot for criminal trespass, attempted vandalism of an ecological site, and reckless endangerment. The man with her got off with a warning, but looked so shaken I doubted he'd ever return to HOA business again. The other guy, her original partner in crime, was caught the next day after being recognized on the footage. He claimed he thought they were setting up a nature viewing platform. No one bought it. The fallout was swift. By the next week, the HOA held an emergency board meeting where members unanimously voted to remove Karen from her position. She didn't even attend. Word had already spread about the incident, the arrest, and the now viral footage titled HOA. Karen tries to cross crocodile pit, gets bitten by the law. News outlets picked it up. Late-night hosts made jokes about it. Someone even remixed her scream into a dance track that played on social media for days. For the first time in years, the HOA was quiet. Actually, quiet. No one complained about frogs. No one sent me notices about tree heights or mailbox colors. In fact, one neighbor dropped off a thank you card with a basket of cookies that said, "For defending nature and our sanity." As for the trench, it became something of a local attraction. I added a small viewing area safely fenced off where people could learn about crocodile behavior and conservation. School kids came by on field trip, Environmental science students asked to do internship. My sanctuary gained exposure, grants, and even a small donation from a celebrity animal rights group that saw the viral video care and eventually moved out. She packed her things in the dead of night, her lawn left untrimmed, her house listed online with the title price to move. A small note on the listing's neighborhood description read, adjacent to peaceful wildlife preserve. I guess even realtors couldn't resist the irony. I sometimes wonder what she thinks when she looks back on this whole thing. If she thinks I won, or if she still sees herself as a victim of some conspiracy involving reptiles and zoning laws. But honestly, I don't care, because now when I walk that road, it's quiet, safe, respected. The crocs glide under the water, the trees sway gently in the wind, and no one dares trespass. Not because of fear, but because of understanding. That land isn't just mine, it's theirs too. And it took a wild, muddy, ridiculous battle to remind everyone of that simple truth. The weeks following Karen's dramatic downfall felt like a season. Change, not just in the weather, but in the entire atmosphere of the neighborhood, where there had once been tension, suspicion, and the grinding hum of ATV engines in the distance. There was now something almost unheard of around here: respectful silence. No one tested the property lines, no one questioned the sanctuary signs, and most importantly, no one came barreling down my private road like they were auditioning for a monster truck rally. The road had become what it was always meant to be, an access point for conservation and peace, not ego and entitlement. It was strange in the best way possible. The crocodiles settled into their new habitat with the kind of contentment only ancient creatures can muster. They moved with that same lazy confidence, claiming their space and defending it without so much as a growl. Nature had restored its own balance in a way no court case or HOA meeting ever could. I continued to monitor them daily, checking the cameras, adjusting the thermal sensors, and maintaining the electric fence system. What had begun as a defensive measure had evolved into a model ecosystem. And I was proud of it. Not just because it worked, but because it told a story. A story about boundaries, consequences, and the power of letting nature speak for itself. But peace never lasts forever. Not because someone tried to trespass again, but because people started to take notice for entirely different reasons. Local news stations had already done their rounds, turning the viral footage into feel-good segments. But when a popular national wildlife magazine published a cover story titled "The Man Who Built a Crocodile Moat to Stop the HOA," the floodgates opened. Suddenly I was getting emails from documentary filmmakers, nature influencers, and even college professors asking if they could bring students to study the trench ecosystem. A producer from a streaming platform wanted to license the footage for an episode of their reality duories about conflicts between suburban development and wildlife preservation. What surprised me the most wasn't the attention, but how quickly the narrative shifted. I wasn't just the guy with the crocs anymore. I was being called an environmental innovator, a symbol of how to defend natural spaces from encroachment. One journalist even compared my trench to an ecological Berlin Wall, which was a bit dramatic, but the point stood. The mode had done more than stop an ATV. It had redrawn the line between reckless expansion and rightful preservation. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. The HOA, now under new leadership, tried to quietly distance itself from the incident. They issued a carefully worded newsletter stating they had refined their policies regarding shared paths and private access, and were committed to fostering respectful relationships with adjacent properties. It was the most passive-aggressive apology I'd ever read. But I didn't need an actual sorry. I had something better. Complete, unquestioned control over my land backed by public approval, legal confirmation, and 2 very relaxed reptiles. Sunbathing, in plain view. Then came the letter from Karen's attorney. Neatly typed, full of legalese and chest-puffing demands, it claimed emotional distress, reputational damage, and even post-traumatic anxiety around wildlife. They threatened to sue me for creating an environment intentionally designed to embarrass and endanger her. I read it twice just to make sure it wasn't satire. It wasn't. She was actually trying to argue that my legally permitted crocodile sanctuary on my own land was somehow a targeted act of harassment. My lawyer laughed so hard on the phone he had to mute himself. We responded formally, of course, attached all the permits, footage, timestamps, county approvals, and public safety assessment. We included a detailed statement from the Wildlife Agency confirming that all regulations were followed and that the animals were not aggressive unless provoked. And then we added the piece to resistance. A signed witness statement from one of her own HOA members who admitted Karen had bragged about teaching the croc guy a lesson and taking the road back by force. The case never made it to court. Her lawyer quietly withdrew within the month. Around that time, I started noticing something new on the faces of my neighbors. Not fear, not annoyance, but curiosity. More than a few stopped by, lingering near the observation fence, asking cautious questions. What do the crocs eat? How do you care for them? Can they recognize you? One Saturday, I set up an educational display on the edge of the property. Nothing fancy, just a folding table, a few pamphlets, and a small speaker to play audio about conservation efforts. I called it Croc Talk. By the third weekend, it had become a full event. Kids showed up with sketchbooks. Local teachers asked if I could speak at the elementary school. Someone even brought croc-themed cupcake. The community that had once looked at me like a hermit with a reptile obsession was now seeing the bigger picture. The trench wasn't just a deterrent anymore. It was a symbol of coexistence, proof that humans and nature didn't have to clash if we learned to respect each other's space. And in that transformation, something even more surprising happened. I made friends, real ones, neighbors who used to whisper about me in HOA meetings were now stopping by to ask if I needed help repairing the gate or if I joined them for a backyard cookout. One even brought me a welcome sign, and shaped like a crocodile with a grin on its face and the words, "No trespassing unless you can swim." Cam, my old buddy who had helped me dig the trench, came back for a visit and was stunned at the change. We sat near the water's edge, watching the crocs lazily float under the late afternoon sun. He raised a beer and said, "You didn't just fix a road problem, you rewired the whole neighborhood." I nodded, not because I had planned it, but because it had happened all the same. As for Karen, no one really knew where she went. Some said she moved 2 towns over, others claimed she took a job in a different state. A few rumors even said she was spotted in a therapy group for people traumatized by reptiles. Whether any of it was true didn't matter. Her reign was over, and in its place stood something sturdier than rules or power: consequences. The land had spoken, and it didn't need a gavel or a megaphone to be heard. I stood at the edge of the trench one evening, watching the last light of the day dip behind the trees. The air was still, filled only with the soft sounds of frogs, the ripple of water, and the quiet breathing of 2 crocodiles who had no idea they'd become local celebrities. I thought back to the day I first saw Karen ripping through my road, the sound of her ATV bouncing off the trees like an insult to everything I'd built. That moment felt so far away now, like a different world. Because this one, the one I stood in now, was stronger, wiser, rooted. Not every problem needs a war to fix. Sometimes it just needs a good plan, a bit of patience, and a pair of ancient guardians with sharp teeth and no tolerance for nonsense. I didn't win because I fought louder. I won because I let the land speak for itself. And when it did, it roared. Not with violence, but with truth, with clarity, with nature reclaiming its space. And just like that, the road that once led to chaos now led to calm. Not a moat, not a battleground, but a boundary.